Engineering and maintenance. I've been working in engineering and maintenance for over 25 years, starting at places like Heathrow Airport, working for a number of large FM companies such as the Babcocks, Carillions, don't judge me by that, Vinci, London Overground, Eurostar, and I've seen some interesting circumstances regarding maintenance. One that stands out in my mind is a standby generator for one customer. And when we took over their site, they said, "Oh, don't touch the generator." I said, "Why not?" They said, "Oh, it never works. And it causes all sorts of problems." And they had a data center in-house. And they said, "Oh, everything will crash and we'll spend weeks fixing everything." And I thought, you've got a standby provision to provide backup power for life, safety and data. And it doesn't work, and you know this. And I talked earlier about behaviours, and I think that's a good example of how people normalise a bad situation. So let's consider, why do we need to do maintenance? And I'm moving on from that example earlier. Well, maintenance is really a form of risk management. If we maintain it, we reduce the risk of things not working, things going wrong. It's also a way of ensuring safety. So if everything's maintained under a regime, it should be safe and present less harm to people and less hazards. We ensure it works when we want it to. And sometimes it might be a requirement of your insurance policy that it's maintained, because maybe your insurance is invalid if you don't have it maintained at the recommended intervals. And overall it gives us a sense of assurance that things are well and good. And if you don't maintain, maybe we'll end up like this. Where is it? Oh, that didn't work, Bijan. Okay, we'll move on. I think my animation is... Oh, no, sorry, here it is. That's what it should have done. So, Alan talked about competent maintainers earlier, so I think we should just understand, if we're talking about maintenance, who is competent? What does competence really mean? And every standard code of practice I read says it shall be done by a competent person, or it shall be maintained by a competent maintainer, or it shall be designed by a competent designer. So I thought we'd look at what the HSE define it as. And it's a combination of training, skills, experience, knowledge. And the general theme is that not everybody will have everything there to a high level, but it's a balance of, some people might have a lot of training and skills with lesser experience and lesser knowledge. Some might have more knowledge and more experience. They also introduce this point here about attitude and physical ability. If you've got to do roof access to get to a smoke control plant, maybe it's the person who's got a broken leg is not the right person to be going on the roof. If you've got a person with a bit of a cavalier attitude, maybe they're not the person you want maintaining your system, because maybe they're not being very diligent in their checks. Moving on to the FIA, and anyone not familiar with them, this is more for the fire alarm side, of which this is covered under the 5839 part of our detection system. Their view is it's about current training and experience. And let's think about that. Somebody who was trained 35 years ago and says, "Yeah, I did a course in fire alarm systems." 35 years ago, the technology has changed completely, and maybe as if they haven't upskilled, they're not the right person to be working on it. Access to tools and equipment and information. If you haven't got the right specialist equipment to maintain a system, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. And capable of carrying out the task, so do they have the physical capability? And then we'll look at the Smoke Control Association's take on it. And all of these follow a similar theme, really. Again, knowledge of the smoke control system, specifically specifying smoke control now. Access to spares, because if you can't get your hands on the right parts, how can you be confident they're actually going to fix it? Other than going down to maybe screw fix and buying something that might just about do. It's not really what we want. And again, sufficient information. So do they have access to the design information, the fire strategy that specified what the system should do, the O&Ms, building layout drawings. So what do we want to check for a maintainer? Who do we not want? Well, we don't really want fire alarm maintainers because there's a number of reasons. They don't understand the arrangements for smoke control lockout. So this is a concept that a fire alarm company just wouldn't, unless they're familiar with smoke control, wouldn't understand. Yeah, they'll go around and test all your heads and check that the panel makes an alarming noise, but they're probably not familiar that the lockout arrangements only allow for one floor to go into fire condition, and all the other floors should lock out and close because the design is specified to only provide ventilation on one floor. A fire alarm company expect multiple fires on multiple floors, and the system should alarm in every place. They're also not familiar with motor controls. So if we have a mechanical system, we have some very large fans on the roof or in the car park or wherever we've located them. And fire alarm companies aren't specialists in motor controls. And they're often 3-phase, 400 volts, so a bit more dangerous and hazardous. And they don't really know how to deal with those and look at motor and fan maintenance. And then we also have something called the automatic transfer switch, which provides the changeover between our dual power supply. And this, again, is something that fire alarm systems don't generally have. They rely on a large battery in the bottom of the panel, which for their purposes is completely adequate, but for smoke control, it doesn't provide the duration we need. So there's a few roles we need to just run through and clarify so we all know what we're talking about when we start to define who does what. We have a user. User is really the person who has the property once it's built. Premises management might be another name. They're the person that appoints the responsible person for the property. So now we're past construction, we're into the operational life of the building. And we also have defined something called the competent maintainer. And for example, it might be FDS or another competent smoke control company. And we have a number of standards we work to under maintenance, key one being 9999, because actually our smoke control standard says go read 9999 with a few extra bells and whistles on there. For fire detection, we have 5839 that specifies how we maintain a fire alarm system. It follows a similar theme to 9999, and even 9999 points back to 5839 saying do all these checks. And I mentioned earlier about a system being an electrical distribution system as well. It's an electrical network, so it also needs testing and maintaining in terms of electrical safety. So we introduced the wiring regulations, and their general basis is 5-yearly testing as well as commissioning tests. So this is a rough outline of what's expected to be done during the life of building and your systems. You can see in the center column we've got smoke control, and in the right column we've got fire alarms. Most of the time they run pretty much the same, but you'll notice that the daily requirement for smoke control doesn't exist, but for fire alarms it does. And really what they're saying is they're not expecting you to do a fire alarm test every day. They're saying check the system's okay. If you've got a panel on the wall, does it have an alarm status on it? Are the lights flashing? Is it trying to tell you something? And that's essentially what you're looking for. Now, because there's no requirement under smoke control, I wouldn't advise not doing anything. I would also say check your smoke control panel. Make sure that also doesn't have alarms on. And I've been into some properties recently where there was an alarm on the panel, and it's probably been there for about 3 months. No one's recorded anything about it or passed it on. And I said, as soon as you tell us about it, we can do something. So these daily checks are your first line of defense in protecting your system. The weekly check is probably the one that everyone's familiar with, the fire alarm test. You press the button on the wall and the bells ring, and sometimes you stay put and other times you run out of the building. In terms of smoke control, what we're looking for there is that the system activates. Nothing more, just that when you activate the fire alarm system or fire detection system. The system fires up. If it's mechanical, that the fans start up and start extracting on the fire zone. If it's a natural system, that the AOV would open. Under a monthly test, this is a bit more comprehensive now. But the most comprehensive one is the 3 monthly test, where over a 3-month period we're actually looking to confirm that every zone throughout the entire building has been operated. So this is non-intrusive testing done by the user, which could be your facilities management company, the premises management company, the concierge. It's not a skilled role, but it's something that should be done by a person who's been briefed and informed. Notice there's no requirement for fire alarm systems there. However, what you often find on some large buildings is the fire alarm company will do 3 monthly visits on large sites, and what they do is they cut up the site into small chunks, and they do 25% of the building every visit. So 4 visits a year achieve a complete cover. At 6 monthly intervals, again, there's no requirement for smoke control other than ensuring the system is working correctly under the previous 3 monthly, weekly tests. But for fire detection systems, you are supposed to do more. You're supposed to do checks on detectors, make sure the panels are working correctly. And then at 12 monthly, we get into a comprehensive service where we're now checking 100% of the system, opening up all the panels and checking the wiring, the cause and effect, and all the devices are working correctly. And then at 5 yearly, we're doing electrical testing, and that's not anything that the smoke control or fire alarm company would do. It's something that you would get an electrical company to do. And we're not talking about the loop for detectors, we're talking about electrical safety, the provision of low voltage power to your panels or your 3-phase automatic transfer switches. So, when does all this begin? We've seen what we've got to do, and when do we start doing it? Well, really, I'd say the starting point is when the building is put into operation, when it's signed off. If somebody is going to occupy that building, it needs to be maintained. And additionally, there needs to be a premises management company appointed. You can't have an occupied building that no one's responsible for. So the two go hand in hand. I doubt people really want to build a building, lock the doors, seal it up, and have it empty. It doesn't make business sense. So what sort of things do we need as maintainers? Well, if we walk into a building and we've installed the system, it's quite easy. We should have all the documentation we want. The challenge comes when somebody else installed a system and a maintainer turns up and says, what is it? So we need a range of information to help get the right result. We need O&M manuals. And they should be comprehensive with a full description of what the system is, what the system does. We need asset lists. If we walk along to a building that we didn't install, how many detectors in there? How many panels are in there? How many fans are in there? And sometimes people don't know, which is sometimes worrying. Drawings of where are these devices? How many floors? What are the cable routes? Logbook. We need a logbook because apparently you're supposed to record all your weekly testing, monthly testing, and all your faults into the logbook. So if that's not happening, you've got no record of evidence should somebody come in to audit you. And by that, I mean the authorities. If you can't demonstrate you've been maintaining it, the view might be, well, you didn't maintain it without the records to prove so. We also need a fire risk assessment, and this is one of the requirements of the RRO now. So to maintain a building and ensure it's still fit for purpose, has a risk assessment been done, and who's doing that? But often these things don't exist when maintenance companies arrive, and we end up with a bit of a question of, well, what do we do next? We don't have any of this information. And actually, if we apply the right standards and read through them and take their advice, I changed slide, what we may actually need to do is carry out a survey of the site, review what's there. It might even require a consultation to provide information that's missing, and Steve's number is available at the end. There's also a number of different maintenance strategies that can be employed. The most obvious one is breakdown maintenance. Very simply, this is, if it goes wrong, pick up the phone and call me. The advantage is it's low cost. The downside is you get a lot of outages, you don't know when it's going to break down, you just hope that it's going to be okay. Then we get into planned maintenance, and years ago the industry evolved from breakdown into planned maintenance, and this is more about, I'm going to come along and inspect your building and check it's okay. You get an early indication that things might start to go wrong, but with planned maintenance you may not be replacing parts, you just come along to have a look. It's a bit like your MOT where somebody looks at it and says, your brakes are okay, you might need to look at them in 6 months' time. But you're still getting outages, you've just got less of them because you're looking more carefully at things. Then we move towards preventive maintenance, and this is where we're actually replacing parts on a set interval. So we might be saying, oh, you've run your fans for the last 9 years. It's about time the bearings were changed, or it needs an overhaul, because we wouldn't want it to fail. The only downside with this is sometimes you're replacing parts and components that aren't worn, that aren't broken. So the industry, cross-engineering, has looked at this again and thought, well, how do we evolve from that? And we ended up with predictive maintenance, sometimes referred to as condition-based monitoring. And this is more looking at keep looking at it. If the parts are worn, you replace it. You start to identify trends of when things might fail. This increases the availability of the system. However, the downside of this is it does require a lot more activity, so you need to have a stronger maintenance regime, which can be more cost prohibitive. So, as we're closing down on this theme, some ideas for the future. What could happen next? Where do we go with all this? Well, we live in the internet generation, and if no one's heard of the Internet of Things, well, I'll be surprised. But it's where I think that systems need to be moving for the future. Having remote monitoring, if we have internet connected devices, we can actually start to remotely monitor and diagnose problems without needing to get an engineer to drive 3 hours across town. That can improve our response. It means that the engineer doesn't need to drive there and say, there's a problem, we need a part. He might be able to identify that before he sets out. So we might be able to protect the building better. We might be able to notify the people that there's a problem in the protection systems. We can also look at things like targeted messaging. So this would be where if a system generates a fault, maybe you don't need to tell everyone in the building that there's a fault on the system. Maybe you need to tell the engineer so we can go and fix it. Conversely, if there's a fire alarm, you probably don't need to tell the engineer there's been a fire alarm. You probably need to tell the concierge or the premises management. So we could start to look at how we provide the right information to the right people at the right time. Perhaps with a service desk where they remotely monitor your building for you round the clock and tell you when there's a problem. I've heard of some situations where an engineer just turns up and says, I'm here to fix the problem on the panel or the system. And people say, what problem? And that's where I think service needs to move to, is when things are being fixed without the user even being aware that there was a problem in the first place. So there's some ideas for the future. Not saying we've got them all yet, but I think it's a direction the industry should probably adopt. Why are we doing this? Let's have a recap on what this is all about for the whole day and everything we've talked about. And I think really it's about helping these guys to really help these people. And I'll leave that there. So thanks for listening. Any questions? What I've seen in years of commercial industry is that the commercial industry has this covered. They have a appointed fire safety officer or somebody in the building. They say, it's you, Bob, you're in charge of fire. And he groans and does some training and he does the risk assessment. And he makes that decision. But when we look at a residential building, who's really there we say there's a responsible person, but where are they? And maybe this is a problem that the residential property premises management people should be looking at, as to how do they ensure their responsibilities are being carried out? How do they assess any changes? And that could be a temporary change where the system's unavailable.